Composting. Hi, good morning everybody, and welcome to what will be, officially our last workshop of the year. Unofficially, we will have one more workshop in a month or so. We will be doing a mango pruning workshop, but that we can't really set the date for that until after the mangoes have fruited. So it'll be a watch this space, and we'll let you know once we've harvested and we have our guest presenter come in and prune our mango tree. But yeah, today is all about composting and just showing everybody that it doesn't matter who you are, where you live, what your family makeup is, you can compost. And so we'll go right through from the easiest right up to what I do in the community garden. Now, if you're watching live, you won't see what we're going to do out in the garden. It's just too hot to be out there today. So we are in the undercover area, but once we've finished filming, we will head out and we can have a play, and I can show you what I do out there. Whilst, if you're here today or when you see me in the garden, we've got these nice new brochures thanks to a grant from Headland First National. We were able to get some new brochures printed, which have been rewritten up to sort of fit me, because I'm the writer of them. Although I didn't do this one. This one I left alone, but the compost one I did completely change. But these are free, so you can grab them today or come and see me and you can get them. The first bit with composting, the easiest thing to do with composting is to not compost. So if you're like, right, I don't want to put my food waste into landfill, you know how many problems it causes, but you know, you work 60 hours a week, you live on your own, you're not producing enough, you live in an apartment, you can still get your scraps out of landfill. There are so many people in this town who have chickens who do compost. Just give it away. So just because you're not composting it doesn't mean it can't be composted. I don't actually compost at home because I have animal composters that do it for me. So I don't have a compost system at home at all. All of my food waste goes to the chickens. Even the stuff that they don't eat goes to them as well. And what they don't eat just stays in the ground. They scratch it, they poop on it, and it composts. So that's a really simple one. If you've got chickens, is just give everything you've got to the chickens and then use their poop. Their poop is amazing. It's one of the best fertilizers you can get. And for me, obviously it's free and I have it in abundance. Most people have got chickens, people with chickens in their street or have a friend or somebody close by that has chickens. And I can tell you, we're always happy for free food. That's your easiest. Or if you've got somebody that is composting, I have in the past said to people, hey, if I provide you with a bucket with a lid, can you fill it for me? And then when it's full or every few days, I'll come and collect it. Those fishing buckets with the lids that you get from Kmart are absolutely perfect if you've got a family and you produce, especially when you've got small kids, and we all know they only eat one bite of toast when they're full, or they eat half a loaf of bread. But yeah, so that was a really good thing that I've done with neighbours in the past, where I've given them the bucket and they just give me the scraps. You can always advertise it on the garden club. So if you've got food waste, just jump on there and say, hey, I live, in the Cook Point area and I have food waste. Who wants it? And every single person with chickens in the area will hit you up for it, and then you just organise it privately from there. So that is the easiest way. The easiest and simplest way to get it out of landfill is to give it to somebody else. I've got people that bring it in here. One of the ladies that was at Open Harvest this morning, once a fortnight, she freezes it all, and then once a fortnight when she comes in for Open Harvest, she brings all the scraps in and dumps it in my compost. So when I'm around, that's a good one as well. Obviously at this time of year, I'm not here as much, so it is a bit more inconvenient. But if you've got the freezer space, chuck it in the freezer and then just in a bulk lot, give it to somebody if they're going to use it for composting and not for chickens. I'm actually going to I've started moving the bed. I want to do a composting system in my chicken pen. So I've got one of those IBC containers that's been cut down sort of about that deep. And what I'm going to do once I've got it moved is all my food scraps will go into that container, and then the chickens can eat out of that. And then everything that they're not eating will stay in there. they'll poop while they're in there. Then I can put in some, at the end of each day, I can put in some hay or some paper shreddings, and that will help break it down. And then eventually it's going to build up and build up. And then every now and again I can just empty it out, and that'll be compost, because they'll get in and scratch it around. They'll do it for me. So it's another really easy way. Chickens, if you can have chickens, in my opinion, one of the easiest ways to do your compost. It's the least amount of work, and you get eggs for them. If you don't want to jump on the garden club, there's a really good app called Share Waste, and that can be used all around the country. I do believe you can use it anywhere in the world, but it was originally started in Sydney, I think it was. And you can do that. So if you're traveling, and we do get travelers that use it, and so you go to Broome and you don't want to get rid of your food waste. So when we went to Broome a couple of years ago, I jumped on the Share Waste app, and yeah, there was people who have it. It's quite well used in Broome, and so they've got it all set up at the front of their yard so that you can just go in. And I think from what she'd said was she didn't have any eggs at the time, but what she has this little setup that any excess eggs she has, she puts in there, and if you want to drop off some scraps, you can take a few eggs in return. So and I'd say it's probably pretty big in places like Broome because there are so many travelers. But we do, every now and again, I'll get a message from travelers saying, hey, you know, can you take my stuff? So yeah, if you are traveling and you want to minimize your waste, there is still that option. It's not, oh, we've gone on holidays, we've got to landfill everything now. You can still, and Share Waste is a really good way to do that. Then you can start small. So things like a bokashi bin. The bokashi bin didn't work for my family. We just have too much food waste. Most of it goes to the chickens. So most of what we were putting in the bokashi was things that the chickens can't eat. And so it was things like, but with your bokashi bin, you can put in your tissues and your paper towel and your meat bones and things like that. But because we weren't putting enough green stuff in it, it was all going to the chickens. It was just not a good idea for us. But if you don't have chickens, and it's a bin, it's got a lid on it, and it's got a little tap, and it just sits on your bench, and you can't smell it while you've got the lid closed. And what you do is every time you chuck your food waste in it, you spray it with a little bit of like an enzyme activator, and it'll help break it down fairly quickly, and it'll actually produce a juice, which is disgusting, but it's full of beneficial bacteria and microbes and all that sort of stuff. One of the things they say you can do with it is you can use it to clean your drains. Because it's full of bacteria, if you put it in, if you've got a stinky drain and you put that in there, it'll actually eat away the bad bacteria that's built up in your drain, and you can use it to actually clean your drains out. Like, it stinks when you do it, but very quickly it'll get rid of any odor in your drain. I've done that before. But it's another good way it's an easy, you just chuck it in. And then once it's full, you can leave it if you've got a second one, or you just find a hole in the garden and bury it. Or again, give it to somebody who's got compost and they can chuck it in their compost. But yeah, if you have a look on the My Compost Revolution website, they've got some really good options for composting. Something I'm working on. That you can get some pretty good discounts depending on where you live, and they've got a whole range, right from your bokashi bin up to compost tumblers, worm farms. That's probably where I would recommend going if you're going to purchase something, would be My Compost Revolution. And because they do have, unless you need a really big setup like what we've got at the community garden, you should be able to find what you need on their website. They've got a full range of products, and I've purchased from them myself before. So yeah, your next step up from a bokashi would be either a worm farm or a compost tumbler. The tumblers really are probably one of the best options. They're easy to use, they're easy to turn. In the past, when I first started out, used to have those square ones. I personally don't like the square ones because they're just too hard to turn. So unless you've got the proper spiral turner, trying to get a shovel or a fork in there is quite awkward. And I find that I was only then able to turn the top stuff and not the bottom stuff, and it just didn't work for me. I do know people that use them successfully, but for me it didn't work. Whereas for your standard family, your compost tumbler really would be your best option, because you get the kids to do it, they love turning it, and it will, and even, you know, if you don't have kids, just chucking everything in and then giving it a turn, it does your mixing for you. So it keeps it aerated, it stops it from going anaerobic, and it keeps it good quality. And the more you mix it, the faster it'll break down. And that's obviously the aim of the game, is to get beautiful compost out of it. So you want it quicker. We've got Trelaw Daycare have got one, and they put all of their veggie scraps in there and their shredded paper, and it's working quite well. Step up from that, if you want to go a little bit one step further than a tumbler, is a worm farm. Now obviously worm farms are a little bit different. They do require a bit more attention, but you're going to get a different product out of it. So you could even do a compost and a worm farm if you wanted the two different products, because the worms, they won't turn the scraps into compost, they'll turn it into worm castings. And worm castings is one of the best, if not the best, things you can use for your garden, because it's their poop. So it's just like horse manure or whatever, but it's way better. And you only need a very small amount of worm castings. So not this year, but last year I emptied the worm farm out here and just spread it everywhere in very small quantities throughout the garden. And I've pretty much got worms in every garden now. Because what happens with the castings is it's full of poop and it's full of eggs. In summer, it can be quite hard to do your, I'm just getting to that, Beck. You do have to worry about the heat in summer with your worms. I find that here, it used to be insulated, but that sort of, you know, it's come off, it's deteriorated over the years. I do find that my worms do die in summer, but the eggs doesn't seem to kill the eggs though. So once the weather cools down again, the eggs all hatch and I've got worms again. So yeah, that's always a good thing. I know people that do keep them through summer and don't have a problem with it. Thank you. My bad. Yeah, so if you can keep them cool enough, you absolutely can keep them through summer. I just can't here with where it's situated. It does get a bit too much sun. I think it gets morning sun, which in summer is still too much. But if you can keep them under a tree, I know Kelly Howlett's is under a tree and she keeps damp net newspaper on the top, and I'm pretty sure she's got her worms all year round. So it can be done. But then you'll get your worm juice out of it, or your leachate, which is a fantastic fertilizer. If you want to go even further, you can actually aerate it and turn it into a worm tea. I haven't gone that far, I just use the leachate, but then you've got your worm castings. So it is still an avenue of composting, and it'll give you a different product. So you could add your compost and your worm castings together and make an even better product. And then you've got your bigger systems like what I've got. If you're going to do what we call a hot compost, so your compost tumblers, your smaller things, they're what we're called a cold compost, and so they do take extra time to break down, and they won't always kill any weed seed that you've got in them because they're not going through that hot process. Or you can do a hot compost, and I would think that in Port Hedland, even a tumbler would probably get to some pretty high temperatures. So you're probably going to have it as a fairly hot compost anyway. But traditionally, with a hot compost, you need space for at least a cubic metre. So it is a big undertaking. So what we've got out in the garden. And what'll happen is when you mix all your ingredients properly, it will get up to temperatures. For a hot compost, it has to be something between like 55 and 70 degrees. And then that will kill most of your weed seeds. Won't kill all of them, but it will kill most of it. So you can compost your weeds. Obviously here, I've got a temperature, a compost thermometer. I probably should try and see what temperatures we're getting up to, and just to see how hot, because I can put my hand in it and nearly burn my hand. So you know that it's hot. And if you mix your ratios correctly, it only takes a couple of weeks up here to make compost. It won't be super fine, but it's certainly good enough to use very quickly. Composting, I don't recommend watching YouTube videos on composting. I know what I'm doing with composting, and I will watch a YouTube video and go, what? This makes no sense. Because you will get people that will talk about your ratios, which is correct, but they'll talk about percentages and mathematical equations, and it's like, yeah, no, that doesn't work for me. Essentially with composting, it is about green ingredients and brown ingredients and getting it right. And there's really simple ways, like you would never ever weigh your green, you wouldn't weigh your veggie scraps and go, right, I've got 2 kilos of veggie scraps, I now need like 10 kilos of brown stuff. It's not going to happen. The very simple way to tell if your compost is correct or needs adjustments, if your compost is too slimy or it's smelly or it's rotten, it means you've got too much green stuff in it and you need some brown. If your compost is too dry and it's not breaking down, it means you've got too much brown, you need to add some green. And it can be very easily rectified. So it's not, oh, my compost is slimy, I've failed, I'll chuck it out. It's just about now just pumping it full of what we call a brown ingredient. So your green ingredients are your nitrogen. So they're things that were alive or are still alive. And then you've got your carbon, which is your dead stuff, your brown stuff. So carbon can be dried leaves, dried grass, shredded paper, hay, cardboard, what else is a carbon? Anything like that. So something that was alive but is now dead. Your nitrogen is alive stuff. So your manures is a bit of a tricky one, even though all your manures are actually physically brown in colour. They are considered a nitrogen and so they're a green. Coffee grounds are also considered a green, they're a nitrogen. Veggie scraps, fruit scraps, green grass clippings. I don't recommend putting green grass clippings in though, they will go slimy. And I don't know anybody that has had it happen, but they can catch fire because they'll smoulder. And whereas if you just leave them out to dry for a few days, it turns them into a carbon and they won't get slimy and whatnot. So obviously I don't have grass, so I don't have a lot of experience with composting grass, but I know growing up, you know, Mum used all of her grass clippings and a lot of people here do. But my recommendation would be just to leave it out for a couple of days and then put it in. Dried leaves are fantastic. There's lots you can do with dried leaves with making things like leaf mold. Leaf mold can take like a year. So it is a long-term project. So if you've, you know, just got I know a friend here who she does it in one of those square ones and she's had a leaf mold going for quite some time. And she's just got a bit of retic set up on it and it just drips the water into it every day to keep it moist and breaks down. And I've seen the product in the bottom. And it's absolutely beautiful. Excuse me. So yeah, your greens again, like I said, yeah, so most of your food waste. There's really not, depending on your level of expertise, there's not really not too much you can't compost. But if you are a beginner or you don't have a massive system, there are things you shouldn't compost. Meat, it just brings you predators, it brings you rodents. The feral cats will get in there and dig it out. If you've got a dog, they'll eat it. It'll bring the mice. So don't put meat in there. Fish, I wouldn't put fish in compost. For me, I bury my fish frames. We don't have any wastage from the fishing at all. What we don't eat, I then give the carcass to the chickens and I let the chickens demolish what they want, and then a couple of hours later I'll go and bury it in the garden. And those bones will break down in our heat through summer. And then that provides some calcium and some other nutrients and minerals into your soil. So fishing should realistically be a zero waste activity. You'll often see on Facebook, especially on the garden club, you know, anybody want fish frames because they are absolutely gold for your garden. So yeah, if you do have fishing people in your family, you don't chuck them out, bury them. They're absolutely beautiful, but I wouldn't put them in a composting system unless you really, really know what you're doing and you've got a big system. The one thing that even I wouldn't put in even into a big system is any wheat product, bread, pasta, cakes. It brings the blowflies, and it just smells. Which in it's the blowflies aren't so much a bad thing if you can handle the blowflies and you're not squeamish with maggots. Maggots break it down really quick. Maggots are actually pretty good in the compost, but it's just that ick factor. Up in Broome, there's a lady who does soldier fly composting. And so the soldier flies are actually becoming quite a big thing in the composting world, where they use the soldier fly larvae to do the composting for them. I think soldier flies aren't what we've got here, I don't believe. But they have them up in Broome, and she runs a business doing composting with soldier flies. And I've seen it on Gardening Australia over the years where there's businesses over east that do it too. It's just that, I guess, that mental thing of, am I okay with my compost being full of maggots? If you are, then chuck your bread in there. It'll bring the maggots really quickly, and they do break it down quite well. But yeah, so bread, pasta, rice is another one that's no good. Again, it'll bring your rodents and your maggots. You'll see everybody saying, oh, you can't put onion peel in, you can't put citrus in, you can't put this, you can't put that. Yes, you can. You wouldn't put in 20 kilos of orange peels. So if you've just done the whole entire footy club with orange slices, you wouldn't put 20 kilos of peel in, because it's going to take way too long to break down. But if you're eating a normal family's worth of oranges a day or a week or a month, and you're only putting one peel in there, it's not going to hurt. The smaller you can break anything up, the faster it will break down. So you need to create a circular cycle of constant wear and regeneration. Yes, Beck. Yeah, it will. Like onion peels. Like I put my onion peel. Well, for me, I give my onion peels to the chickens, and they don't eat them, but they break down fine. So yeah, like I said, so long as you're not putting 20 kilos of something in there, it will be fine. So yeah, I even put citrus and lemon and onion peels and things in the worm farm. They won't be instantly attracted to it, but it will get eaten eventually. But you wouldn't want to put 20 kilos of anything in there. Like you wouldn't go and put, 20 kilos of tomatoes in there or anything. You would have to do it properly. So just be mindful with how much citrus you put in there and how you do, and it's fine. It's still a compostable material. It's still something we don't want going into landfill. I'm not sure if anybody's ever seen the post. I haven't seen it for a while, so I might have to dig it up again. There was something in, I think it was South America somewhere. They did an experiment where they got juice shops. They got their orange pulp, and it was like semi-trailer loads full of pulped up orange pulp, and they just dumped it all in this area that was completely barren and bare, and they left it. They didn't do anything with it for 20 years. And when they came back 20 years later, they couldn't find the site, because it was so overgrown and it had completely regenerated everything. And then they took pictures of before when they dumped it all, then they took pictures of when they came back, and they had to basically cut things down to find the sign. So it takes time, but it works. The land was dead when they put it there, and 20 years later it was beautiful. So it does work. It's fine. There's lots of stuff. So when we compost, it's about getting, like I say, it is about your ratios and layering. So all composts is basically like making lasagna. If you were to put a whole pile of horse manure and then a pile of hay straight on top, it's going to take a really long time to break down. Whereas if you were to do a thin layer of each, it helps the process, because they work together. So when we go out and have a look at the garden out there, the compost out there, you might be able to see some of the shredded paper. Shredded paper up here composts really, really quickly, and shredded paper you can get in abundance for free. We are really fortunate in Port Hedland where we can get all of our ingredients that we need free of charge. I compost heavily with horse manure because it's abundant and it's free, and it means I can make massive bulk loads of it. And then composting it then obviously increases your nutritional value, so to speak, of your horse manure, because it's not horse manure anymore. It's composted and you've added all your scraps and things like that. There's some really cool things around the home that you can compost, things like your dog hair, cat hair, all that sort of stuff, even your hair if you have a haircut, chuck it in the compost. One thing I would say not to compost that a lot of people say you can is tea bags. Most tea bags are full of microplastics. We now know that with microplastics, everybody knows microplastics in the ocean are bad, that the plankton absorb it and then it goes up the food chain till it gets to us. But what we now know is that plants can also absorb microplastics. So any microplastic you've got in your compost, the plants have done studies with it and they've actually found bits of microplastics inside apples because it's gone right through the system and ended up inside an apple. Tea bags are full of like tens of thousands of little tiny bits of microplastics in a tea bag. A lot of the tea companies are getting on board with making them plastic free, and I believe the brands that do it will advertise it on the box. So unless you're 100% set in your brand of tea, have a look and you can find plastic free tea bags, or just switch to loose leaf tea. If you've got loose leaf tea or anything like that, that's perfectly fine. It's actually really good for the garden. If you're not sure on your tea bag, you can break it open, but just don't put the bag in. I've seen experiments done in worm farms with different brands of tea bags where they've laid them out in the worm farm and just waited for the worms to do their thing, and you can see the ones that have got plastic in them and the ones that have got no plastic. The ones that don't have any plastic in them, the entire tea bag is gone. The microbes have got in and eaten it, and the worms have come in and eaten the microbes, and there's nothing left. Whereas the ones that have still got the plastic in them, they've actually eaten around the plastic. So you'll see the distinct line of the tea bag still there, and it's all the plastic that's been left. So tea bags are a no unless you know that they're plastic free. And they're getting there. The companies are getting better with getting their plastic out. Some are transitioning, some have made the whole thing, and I think some haven't bothered at all, but you can find them. Eggshells are one that I do not put in the compost. If you put in an eggshell, like you've cracked your egg open and just chucked it in the compost, in 20 years time that eggshell will still look the same. What I do with my eggshells is I leave them on the bench and they dry out. I then chuck them in the Thermomix and powder them. You don't have to do that. You can crush them up any old way you like. I mostly just then feed them back to the chickens, and it gives the chickens a good calcium hit, which makes their eggs stronger and obviously makes them healthier as well. Other options are then to put your powdered eggshell into your compost, or just put it on your garden. It's a good calcium hit. The smaller you can break your eggshells up, the faster they will be of use. When I powder it, it sort of looks like flour by the time I'm finished, and that just dissolves with the hose. Whereas if you were to just chuck an eggshell in, it's never going to break down. It's calcium, it's a bone. So it's about getting it as fine as possible. Let me see, what are other ingredients? Have I got it on here? Probably not. Yeah, so when you do your composting, it's layers. So a layer of brown, a layer of green, brown, green, all the way. So I like to try and have as large a diversity of different ingredients as I can, because obviously everything brings a different nutrient or benefit to the table. So things like you go to Coles and Woolies and get the lettuce and veggie offcuts and scraps. They're fantastic to put in there. The smaller you can break everything down to, the faster you're going to have compost. Another really easy way to compost, if you don't want to compost, is freeze it all, and then once a week, once a fortnight, whatever, blitz it in the Thermomix, the blender, whatever you've got, and add some water, make it into a liquid, and you can bury that too. And then that's going to be pretty much instantly accessible to your plants. So that's another really, really easy one, is just blitz it and liquid it. Composting shouldn't be as hard as what I've got out there if you're in a home setting. Most people don't need the quantities that I need. yeah, so what we'll do is we'll layer it. So I'll have put in horse manure. Every time I layer it, you give it a good hose so that it's nice and moist. And then I'll put in a layer of hay, give it a hose. Then I want a nitrogen again, so I might put some coffee grounds in, water it in, then maybe a layer of paper, water it in, some greens or some veggie scraps or whatever I've got, water it in, and you just keep going like that. And then when we go out and have a look at that in a minute, you'll see the different, depending on how broken down it is, because I haven't touched it for a while, you'll actually see where the different things were. And then when you mix them all in, it turns it all around. But yeah, I think, what have we got? It's already 10 to 10 anyway. Any questions? Anybody who's watching got questions? Just type them and I'll get back to it in a sec. Yes. Oh, I thought you had a question. Sorry.
It's just that thing we learned from Josh about dog poo.
Dog poo? Yep. So dog poo is absolutely compostable. Not in your normal composting system though. Dog poo, so if you've got natives, non-edibles, that's perfect for that. So what a really easy way, and I believe you can do cat poo as well, but cat poo is really full of pathogens. So I think your best bet for cat poo realistically is to just landfill it. But dog poo isn't as full of the pathogens as what cat poo is, but it's just not for your edibles. So one of the really good ways to do your dog poo is to get like your PVC pipe, drill a heap of holes in it, bury it in the ground, and then have a lid on it, get a cap with a lid on it, and then whenever you do your poop scooping, just chuck it in there. That is a green, so it is a nitrogen. So if you can chuck some dry grass clippings or some shredded paper or whatever in, and it'll just break down over time and will feed the soil around it. So yeah, nothing edible though. So there is options, and it depends on the size of your dog too. Like if you've got two, Rottweilers, you may need a pretty extensive system. But if you've got a Chihuahua, one of those towers is probably fine. But it can be done. Things like if you've got fish water is amazing. That's what we use for the aquaponics. Obviously, if you've got salt water, no. But if you've just got guppies, if you've got goldfish, any of that water can be put straight on your garden, or you can put it into your composting system and that'll add some more nutrients in. But yeah, all right, I'm going to sign off on here. Thank you for watching. There's no more the mango leaves. I would do the mango leaves, just break them up. I can't see it being too much of a problem, but you're going to do it and you can let us know if it didn't work. All right, thanks for watching everybody. Bye.